Greetings, this is Michael King. I'm at my mountain house, and because these Apple-based earbuds actually have pretty good microphone, I decided to use this to film. I don't have my computer fixed yet, and I'm gonna get a new microphone because I've had people complain about the audio quality. But honestly, this is actually better audio quality than the microphone that I have that I've been using my computer for. So I figured I'd just shoot a quick video and also show you guys the scenery for those of you who don't just listen to videos like podcasts and like to watch the screen. Yeah, enjoy this scenery at Wolf Laurel, right in the heart of Appalachia on the border of North Carolina and Tennessee. I want to make a shorter video because most of my videos are pretty long, but I decided to do a small series just going over basic framing devices because I cover a lot of difficult subjects that go into abstract territory like philosophy and geopolitics, and I also get lost in the weeds quite a bit, so people who are new to these subjects might get a little bit confused. So when it comes to these conspiratorial conversations for how the behind the scenes world government works, I just call it the Roman Empire because I argue that most of the dominant arms that run the world right now, whether it's intel agencies, whether it's secret societies, go back to orders of chivalry, which have their roots with orders decreed by the Holy See, which goes back to Rome, and then there's other institutional aspects of it which go back to Rome or other parts of the ancient world that were then infused into this overall Roman power structure. So because the buck stops at Rome, I'd argue, let's look at two Latin terms which I think get to important distinctions in understanding how power works. That is de facto and de jure. So in these conspiracy talks, people will sometimes discuss, oh, hey, Russia has this kind of goal, China has this kind of goal, the United States has this kind of goal, and they're talking about geopolitics, talking about balance of power. Then other people who agree with my over framework that we have a shadow world government, they'll say, no. All those countries are owned by the crown. All those countries are owned by the Vatican. So they'll say that it's not as meaningful and it's misleading to talk about different countries like they have their own interests and are autonomous, which to a large degree I agree with, but I see a little bit of a tendency to throw the baby out with the bathwater. I don't want to name names and I don't want to get into drama, but it's like, if you make it sound like, oh, well, we know who's behind the scenes, so all these other variables that go into maybe this country made this move because it has so-and-so interests, like, there's still degrees of that which can be true, and that goes back to de facto versus de jure distinction. The overall world government is unofficial, and if you try Google searching, oh, who runs thing, who's really the most rich and wealthy person, who really controls the most assets, you're not going to find results that show you who's really running things up the power chain. You'll end up getting de jure results. So de jure is what's official, what's legally recognized. What you see is what you get. So de jure, the United States is a sovereign government with a sovereign country with 3 branches of government, and it's democratic. You have all these democratic procedures. But then de facto, you can argue, which I do, that it's part of a much larger, shadowy world government, right? That's not as officially recognized. So The de jure is what's officially recognized, but de facto is how things are, but it might not be legally recognized. And you end up getting into some tension between these two distinctions. So with some mainstream examples, I'll go to Russia and Crimea. So ever since 2014, Russia has been pretty much calling the shots with Crimea on multiple levels, but on paper, it's still under Ukraine. A lot of people will design maps that show Crimea as part of Ukraine, even though that's not officially how it does things. And then you end up getting into disputes on international law as to if the proper way of looking at it is de facto or de jure. And you had similar disputes when Pinochet, he had a military dictatorship in Chile. What ended up happening there is officially they had this kind of constitutional, democratically elected government, but it really didn't have any power. It was all in the military dictatorship. So you ended up having some tension between what was legally recognized and how things were really operating. But really, all this is standard play for how the world government actually works. It's just in more corrupt countries, the veil slips and you can actually see how illegitimate and corrupt things are. But with less corrupt countries, there's more plausible deniability for things working. Like what you see is what you get, so to say. Like there's more reasons people can go along with their lives and just assume that the American government in the United States functions as the Constitution's written. It's like most people who are going to click on this video and follow my YouTube channel are going to know that that's a bunch of BS, but ways you can end up seeing holes in that armor. I'm not going to go out and absolutely prove this. I'm just going to give examples, and maybe it'll be worth proving in another video, another project. But two mainstream examples. It's actually not very hard to prove that a good bit of the property and income taxes in Maryland, for instance, go right to the Crown, have money laundering channels that go to the Crown Corporation of London. And you actually can find this through de jure or official channels as well, but it's hidden through legalese, it's hidden through ownership chains. And another example that was pretty mainstream came up in Florida. So if you guys remember, there was a lot of controversy 2022, 2023 between Ron DeSantis of Florida and Disney. So Ron DeSantis was taking claim over, like, hey, you guys are operating on state property. By the way, that's Big Ball behind me. It's a beautiful view. I think I'm going to film my next video up there. But yeah, anyways, Ron DeSantis wanted to be able to liquidate assets from Disney and penalize them, but they ended up running into legal trouble because once they peeled back layers of ownership, they're like, wait a second, Disney actually is chartered by the Crown and is actually being protected by the royal family, right? And there's other reasons for this. So in Disney and a lot of places like this, part of the reason why there's all these legal loopholes is it comes down to child labor laws. It comes down to covering up for human trafficking, actually. And a lot of the people that end up being trafficked through these channels aren't even like documented, registered American citizens either. But I just bring that up because when we talk about unofficial de facto power, the power that's kind of hidden, these kind of trafficking and money laundering operations are actually what holds this entire world cartel together. Like the shot callers couldn't actually operate and keep devaluing currency if they didn't have another currency that didn't devalue, and that is other human beings. It's pretty messed up. But also, when it comes to former Spanish territories like California, New Mexico, and also Florida, you see a lot of cartel involvement. And I brought up how a lot of the people that are trafficked through places like Disney aren't even officially American citizens. That actually is worse at places on the border and former Spanish territories. But you also have a good amount of cartel involvement. So you have cartel involvement in economies in Florida, especially Miami and Tampa, where you have port cities, where you have a lot of drug and human trafficking transactions, and money laundering is shells for that. But also, wherever you have the cartels, you have backdoor channels for ownership of the Spanish crown also. So they end up working through the British livery system too. So the British livery system, the British liveries, you're not going to be able to find much information about these still being all that big on paper, but the British livery fraternity is based in the city of London and operating out of Lord's Mayor Court of Inns connected to the Crown Temple in London. That really is the highest level of ownership. So if you notice, the Knights of the Garter, which their base is St. George's Chapel at the Windsor Castle, the Spanish royals have been inheriting roles, like senior roles for the Knights of the Garter, even though on paper only the English royals are supposed to inherit that. Now they're not running it or anything like that, but them being British knights gives them official access to that livery system, but there's layers. So it's not all like, okay, this thing going on here, it's in the category of de jure because it's official, but then this over here, because it's not as well known, it's in the category of de facto. That's what I'm getting at with this whole complex chain of ownership. It's like there are legal structures in place to where you can't really fight this stuff in court. You can't really fight the illegitimacy of the unofficial hidden power structure in court because there's enough de jure, enough officiality to give them cover. But a lot of the lawyers, a lot of the people working in these both state level, national level positions, which would be dealing with people in these criminal operations, most of these people in these positions officially don't even know that's what's going on. They don't even know about these kind of legal loopholes being exploited. So that's why this gets really complicated, and why whenever people talk about, oh, well, so this country has these interests and they're focusing on these operations. It's like, I don't brush off people analyzing things, stopping at national level like that, because for most of the people who are working for those countries, working in the interest of those countries, they are deceived. They don't really know that they are doing the bidding of an international level cartel-like government. So that actually becomes a very important distinction, because when it comes to people that we might call agents for the global empire, most of them themselves are deceived and don't even know who they are actually looking for or working for. That's where this gets pretty complex, and this ends up going into intel. So who is doing the long-term planning for the United States? It's not the executive branch, because the executive branch, you end up on paper, it ends up being run by different parties every 4 to 8 years. You end up getting a different guy coming in. It's like, you couldn't have the kind of long-term planning for international operations that America is overseeing if that was the end-all be-all. The one who actually is doing the long-term plans, overseeing implementation both of foreign affairs and national level policy, would be the State Department and the intelligence apparatus, especially the CIA. So this also ends up going back to London, but I'd also argue Rome. So I brought up London in the context of unofficial versus official ownership chains. Well, this also goes to intelligence and shadow government. So I'd say when it comes to formal things, so I'm going to make another video. I'm going to make another video about the formal versus informal dichotomy, because that's something else that's really important to understand. But I'm just going to spoil it. I'm going to say formally, in terms of measurable hierarchies, even if they're more de facto hidden, London is the top of the formal chain of command. It's where there's the most discernible chain of ownership, the most discernible chain of command, right? And I'd say informally it would be Rome, but also maybe a little bit Valencia, Spain. All right, that's a lot to unpack. I'm just highlighting that because it's relevant to the CIA, which is an example that I'm giving. Okay, so the CIA ends up reporting in large part to Wall Street bankers and business interests who organize and meet at the Council on Foreign Relations. But if you look at the Council on Foreign Relations itself, it was created by both Vatican and British channels. Vatican channels through the Knights of Malta and the Jesuit Order, and British channels through British intelligence, MI6, and the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable. And once you look at the CIA's chain of command, a lot of these people don't even know who they're working for in the long run. It's like whenever you come to the level of agents who are groomed for certain positions, rather it's through the GATE, the gifted programs because what they do is they recognize people who are high IQ and have high aptitude for spy work, and they literally groom them and train them for such positions. So whenever you come to people who talk about the London channels, how powerful England is, how the English Empire is still around, there's publicly sourced books written by Council on Foreign Relations archivists like Carol Quigley. So for those people, such information is standard training, but not all the agents even know that much. Some of them will think, hey, we're working for American interests, where those guys who are groomed for it, they understand the connection between CIA operations and older British opium lord operations, because drug dealing is 100% connected to the history of British intelligence. So once you peel back the curtain, you realize that there's a whole lot of overlap between organized crime, the mafia, and American intelligence. Because as I was saying earlier, the drug trade and trafficking trade is the underbelly for all the unofficial stuff going on. It's like our banking cartel would fall apart overnight if it wasn't for all that stuff, because it's a continuation of the Opium Wars. What happened after World War II is the Council on Foreign Relations, which was answering to British channels through the Rhodes-Milner Roundtable splinters, which is now running from Chatham House, they were coordinating with other international scale operations to reconfigure the black market Silk Road type routes, which, as I said, is what the global economy actually hinges on. In fact, it's actually been proven. It's I forgot the United Nations guy's name, but this is someone working for the United Nations. The United Nations came out and said, oh yeah, 2008, the entire world economy would have fallen apart if it wasn't for the international drug trade. That just shows you how how illegitimate all of this is. Then on the whole mafia organized crime end, I'd argue a lot of that is actually organized through Rome and ends up answering to Rome. So this goes back to both the CIA and the mafia. If you watch the Godfather movie, Godfather 3, Corleone was made a Knight of Malta at the beginning of the movie. But also, if you look at the directors for the CIA, the shot callers to the CIA, or other high-ranking people in it, maybe who weren't directors, but people like William Buckley, who were both influential in the spy world, but also influencing people's thoughts, they were actually Knights of Malta, just like top mafia bosses are, like you saw in the Godfather movies. So one thing I'll point out about the whole Godfather connection is it's pretty interesting that look at the Corleone coat of arms in the Godfather, then look at the coat of arms for the city of Valletta, which became the capital of Malta. Then compare it to the Massimo coat of arms. So the Massimo is both informally and de facto, I'd argue, pretty much a top family. They are the principal overseers of the Order of Malta behind the scene. Recently, he died in 2022, I think, or 2023, but Carlo Massimo, he ran the Italian chapter for the Knights of Malta on paper, but going back to the de facto versus de jure, de facto ran the Order of Malta through the Italian chapter. But yeah, these movies actually will give away a good bit of that information. So why that's important also when it comes to CIA and coordinating the American arm, the American branch, international operations, is they weren't just taking their orders from Londonian channels like the Rhodes Milner Roundtable. So they were straight up meeting at Rome once per twice a year, okay? So when it comes to the Council on Foreign Relations, like I brought up, which ultimately goes back to, I'd argue, more British channels, it's not too hard to prove that Rockefeller is the one overseeing that. So when Rockefeller was chairing Chase Bank, he was on paper the chair of the Council on Foreign Relations for 15 years. But he worked very closely with the Knights of Malta too, okay? So where you can see a physical example of this kind of overlap and this cooperation is, look at where the Rockefeller Center is based. The Rockefeller Center is right across from St. Patrick's Cathedral, and St. Patrick's Cathedral is where the Archbishop, or he usually works his way up to Cardinal, so right now Cardinal Timothy Dolan, that's where the Cardinal of New York is based. And then you have NBC, you have all these banks and media outlets near there. They're all being overseen by the same exact hierarchy. It just has more than one primary base of operations, and that's London and Rome. So the Cardinal of New York, back when it was uncovered the CIA was meeting in Rome at the Knights of Malta headquarters once a year, that was being overseen by the Cardinal of New York, Francis Spellman. So the Mother Goose actually did an expose, a story on this, where a bunch of the CIA shot callers, whether they were officially Knights of Malta or not, they were meeting in Rome to coordinate with the international mafia and to coordinate with other intelligence groups that would be coordinating through Le Cercle and the whole P2 lodge over in Italy. So for those of you who don't know what Le Cercle and P2 is, I'm bringing up a lot of stuff because this is a pretty complex subject, but just to make things simple, Le Cercle would be coordinating between mafia and intelligence activities over on the French end, but they meet less. But P2, they were basically a Masonic lodge over in Turin, but you had all the who's who's of Italy and also Italian-related colonies. So where you have a lot of Italian immigrants, places like Argentina, they have a lot of feedback into P2 also. So they had intelligence networks. They were overseeing mafia activities in other countries. So yeah, the Knights of Malta would be the glue holding a bunch of those different operations, where you'd have the CIA, P2, all these guys share notes over in Rome, because Rome is still one of the principal capitals for the de facto and the unofficial world government going on here. All right. So I hope these distinctions are helpful whenever you see people getting into these kind of discussions, because I think that on one hand, it's a mistake to look at things like, oh, well, we have this country acting in this interest, we have this country acting in that interest, and here's that, because what you see isn't really what you get. Things aren't always what you appear, but because that is officially how things are, and most of the people in these operations are being deceived and duped, that level of analysis isn't completely irrelevant, because it's like we can't read these people's minds. So if you don't have this kind of balance, then what you get is you get this kind of cartoonish view where the secret societies that do run the world, you have this idea where it's super organized, and it's as efficient as a military chain of command, where once you're initiated a certain level in this world government, you know who you report to, and there is a clear chain of command. That's not how it works. It's much more compartmentalized. All right, so that's why you have a bunch of splinter intelligence agencies for different countries and a bunch of different ethnic mafias, where you have outer rings for these groups competing and even killing each other. But then once you get to the inner levels, that's where you find commonality between maybe some Masonic lodges, maybe Knights of Malta, maybe Jesuits. But there's even layers behind those. So like let's say you're a Scottish Rite Freemason, and you have some CIA adjacent operations going. Like maybe you're a judge, maybe you're a banker. You're not fully in the know, because on paper the Freemasons and Catholics don't entirely get along. So you could have someone on that level that's in some conspiratorial groups and has quite a lot of influence, but he'll still think, oh well, my secret society opposes Rome. We might be working with that Londonian axis, but then other people who are in the know in the Scottish Rite, they might actually be Jesuit or Knight of Malta affiliated too. So even people at that level can be deceived. And at the end of the day, it's all one single power structure, I'd argue, but it's so criminal and so illegitimate and so outrageous that even quite a lot of the power players on multiple levels have to be deceived. But this also means that the power structure and de facto world government isn't unbeatable either, because like I said earlier, and I'm gonna wrap it up here, the linchpin for all these operations is human trafficking, right? It's illegitimate money. Because, you know, if you've listened to my other videos about the banking cartel, you'll know how that's a completely unsustainable mess. How you can't keep just making money out of thin air. It's unsustainable. Yeah. Because our currency is mostly fake, the currency that the elites use that underpins all this is the human trafficking. And also, how do you keep all these different groups with different motivations in line, where even high-level agents can be deceived? Well, how you do that? Hey, come to this party with me. Oh, you think that 16-year-old girl's hot? You think that 15-year-old boy's hot? Have fun with her, have fun with him. Oh, well, you just did that? Well, it would be a shame if word of that got out. So these high-level trafficking operations, of people overseeing that, these people end up overseeing middle and upper level management too. So this entire thing runs on human slavery that's completely covert and completely illegitimate. And by the way, I might add that the kind of human slavery we have now, it's far worse than it was before the Civil War. It's far worse than chattel slavery with the Atlantic Triangle. It's worse than it's ever been, but you hardly know about it. In fact, I'd say that if people knew how bad it was at the border, how bad it was south of the border in Latin and South America, people wouldn't even be caring about Epstein, aside from Epstein representing data points on a much larger conspiracy. Because, oh my gosh, like the majority of children who are raped and murdered, and a lot of these other trafficking victims, they're not being victimized and disposed of on islands like Epstein Island. A lot of it happens on yachts, where it's much easier to dispose of bodies, and also it's not uncommon for them to be disposed of in crematoriums and transported through underground tunnels. So it's like Epstein is a good entry point because he represents an elite level of this, but my gosh, he is not the end all be all. But also, when it comes to people who haven't been completely blackmailed, but who still have decent positions of authority, because maybe you can have some judges, maybe you can have some attorney generals who haven't been blackmailed, because not everyone, I am not convinced that everyone who's in a position of power is automatically evil and automatically just, oh, they're an agent for the empire, so don't bother being friendly with them, don't bother talking to them. I've had people say stuff like that to me. I'm like, come on. It's like, they'll say, look, these people are the house slaves. They serve the master, which is the global empire, more closely, and all of us, we're just field tax slaves. But all right, so if we're going to have any kind of hope at exposing and liberating ourselves from the world empire, it's not going to be from revolution, because revolution is a top thing in the toolkit. It's going to have to be through mass non-compliance, but we're going to need legal and institutional support from it. It's like an anarchic path is a complete dead end. You're going to have to appeal to the house slaves. But yeah, that's where the hope comes in, because there's all this complex balance between the de facto, the de jure, the official, the unofficial, the formal, and the informal. That means that if you can do a good job explaining this to enough people, showing how illegitimate the power structure is, how illegitimate finance is, but also, it's like, the reason why I do this, because I realize how many kids are victimized, brutalized, molested. It's outrageous to me. And it's because I'm a human being. I'm made in the image of God, and I recognize that it's inherently wrong to do that to people, and other people recognize that also. It's outrageous because we are all in the image of God, and it's built in both our instincts, our God-given moral sensibility to want to be protective over children above all else. So that's where the hope comes in, to be able to appeal to people that can do something. It's like, nothing bothers people more than doing the kinds of things to children that these people do. So it's like, the kind of people that might be in on certain conspiracies but aren't neck deep into where they're brutalizing children, point this stuff out to enough of them, and you can have enough middle management people that have significant power in institutions be able to flip and let this entire power structure completely implode on itself. Now, there's going to be difficulties there, but I'm just pulling this out because there's hope. And a lot of people just make it sound like, oh, well, you have this compartmentalized control, top down, and it's like, on one hand, they might vaguely offer solutions, but it's like, at that point, the picture of the world government they're painting is that it's just a demiurgic prison. It's just completely hopeless, and I find that to be an imbalanced view that I see worth addressing. So I hope that you found these distinctions helpful. I'm going to be filming my next video from up on top of there. Looks like it's about getting ready to storm, so I should get in soon. But anyways, if you watch it and got all the way through it, thank you. And I might end up putting in a Cash App link or something. I don't want to treat my audience like a cash cow, but it's like, I work full time. I don't have a lot of time to be making these videos, but also I could use some extra change to be able to fix my computer, just have it sent somewhere, because this stuff is pretty expensive. So I might go ahead and do that, but I never want to treat my audience like a cash cow either. All right, but anyways, have a good one.